The Loch Ness Monster, a mythical beast in the modern world.
The Loch Ness Monster dates back to a myth that's centuries old.
It was terrifying. It could eat you, it could drag you to your death.
It's truly a monster.
What is really in these waters?
There is the potential that maybe it is still out there. It's just real enough to keep the hope alive.
Now investigators use the latest science to unravel one of the last great monster mysteries. Could the creature be a living fossil? A survivor from the age of the dinosaurs?
These were not sweet little animals. They were every bit as ferocious as a T-Rex.
Or does another ferocious beast lurk in this lake?
So if you saw this in Loch Ness, you might think you were looking at an alligator.
The hunt for the truth behind this monster will reveal our deepest fears.
Myth-making is not unique to the ancient world. It is still happening all the time.
And the incredible secret at the bottom of Loch Ness. In the Highlands of Scotland, there is a lake that's thought to be home to a huge and terrifying creature. The Loch Ness Monster.
Everyone really has heard of Loch Ness. It is up there in the top 5 monster myths.
We have this very kind of tourist-friendly image of the Loch Ness Monster, but in origin, the Loch Ness Monster was something that was actually quite scary.
Known as Nessie, this legendary beast baffles modern science. What could explain nearly 3,000 sightings here?
There are still plenty of people who believe the Loch Ness Monster is an actual living being. That you can go to Scotland, and if you hang out long enough along the shore, sooner or later you'll see this thing come cruising by.
Comparative anatomist Dr. Joy Reidenberg is an expert on marine biology. She's on a mission to find out once and for all if a real beast lies behind the Loch Ness stories.
There are lots of water monsters in mythology. In fact, some of them we think we understand. The problem with Loch Ness is that we don't have an animal that we can pin it on.
So Joy turns to what we do know. The first ever recorded sighting of a terrifying monster here. In the 6th century, a Christian saint called Columba traveled to Scotland with his followers. Near the River Ness, they witnessed the burial of a man. The locals claimed a giant water beast had mauled his body and drowned him. As Columba's men looked for a way to cross the river, the beast reappeared. Columba made the sign of the cross to protect his disciple and managed to repel the monster, forcing it to retreat back into the depths of the River Ness.
The best account we have of an actual interaction with the beast is St. Columba, but it doesn't give us any evidence of what the beast looked like. We don't know its shape, we don't know its size, we don't even know if it has teeth.
Some historians have cast doubt on the credibility of the tale. This man of God was famous for his miraculous exploits across Scotland.
The monster in St. Columba's story is your kind of classic tale of your Christian saint driving out this beast, this aberration of nature that shouldn't be living there.
In a lot of early stories that involved saints defeating monsters, the important thing is that they were evil and defeated by followers of Christ.
But medieval accounts confirm that Columba did travel to the Scottish Highlands. Could there be a grain of truth behind the legend? What kind of monster could drag a man to his death? Joy examines the earliest photos of what may be the beast. In the 1930s, there was a sudden explosion of sightings. One person described seeing a long-necked creature with a ponderous body. Newspapers dubbed it a plesiosaur, an aquatic reptile supposedly extinct for 66 million years.
There's this one over here that shows something swimming in the water towards the castle. And there's even this one over here that looks like something splashing in the water that has a snake-like tail to it.
Most of the images are blurry. Some are almost too good to be true.
It looks an awful lot like a long-necked dinosaur that I used to play with as a kid.
So could a plesiosaur really be hiding in this lake?
Stranger things have happened, and we have to keep an open mind, because there are, after all, lots of stories of sightings.
Today, there is only one place in Scotland where you're guaranteed to find a plesiosaur: the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow.
This is our prime suspect. This is a pretty impressive looking animal. We're looking at something that's roughly the size of a killer whale.
These huge marine animals are not quite as agile as people imagined them in the 1930s. But as an air-breathing reptile, a plesiosaur would have raised its head above the waves.
It could lift its head a little bit, but not all the way up like a swan. This neck has all these spiny processes sticking up. These would have limited how far back it could pull its neck, because once the processes touch each other, that's the limit of how far it can go.
The plesiosaur was ferocious, just like the original beast in the legend of St. Columba.
This is a predator. This animal was not eating plants. These teeth are grasping teeth, and they're to grab slippery things like fish and hold it in place. It reminds me a lot of the head of a crocodile.
To Joy, the shape of the predator's head suggests that it could even ambush prey like a crocodile.
It's really arrowhead-shaped, which means it could snug that head in right against the shoreline. It would be under the water. And then, surprise, this mouth comes up with these teeth and just grabs whatever's walking along the shoreline. That's a pretty scary thing to encounter.
The plesiosaur ticks many boxes, but could one still be alive today? In her laboratory, Joy examines one type of sea creature that predates the dinosaurs.
Sharks emerged around 450 million years ago. They survived the extinction events that took out the dinosaurs. And today, we still have sharks that are relatively unchanged. They look like their ancestors from so long ago.
Joy examines one species of prehistoric shark.
We're looking at a bear's den shark. It's a fossil that was found near Glasgow in Scotland. Tests show that this fossil is 330 million years old, and yet, modern sharks look remarkably like this.
Sharks are some of the most successful animals that have ever lived. Today's species are smaller, but they share the same basic design as their ancestors.
This is a dogfish, a relatively small, modern shark. And if we look at the tail, what you notice is that the skeleton goes into the top part. It doesn't fork and go into both parts or stop and just have rays. And look, the bear's den shark has the same thing, and that's unique to these fish.
All species that have survived from the era of the dinosaurs or earlier have evolved and changed. But some are still almost indistinguishable from their prehistoric cousins.
This fish, called a coelacanth, actually evolved hundreds of millions of years ago, long before dinosaurs. This fish was thought to be extinct. It was only known from fossils.
Coelacanths lived alongside plesiosaurs until about 66 million years ago, when both died out. Or so it seemed. In 1938, South African fishermen caught a living coelacanth. And in the 1990s, another one even showed up at an Indonesian fish market. It turns out that against all the odds, a few coelacanths survived, hiding in the dark depths of the ocean. Could a plesiosaur nessie have done the same?
Sometimes we can be wrong. Something we thought was an extinct animal we only knew from fossils is still alive today, relatively unchanged, in the same body form.
It seems impossible. But incredibly, a plesiosaur seems to match some of the photos and accounts. Is a prehistoric relic really hiding in this remote corner of Scotland?
Most of the modern mythical beasts have ways that believers try to connect them to the past. There are those who believe that Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the Yeti are these kind of surviving populations of creatures.
This notion that there's like a relic from prehistory that is still out there somewhere points to the fact that our world is still not completely explainable.
Joy investigates how a plesiosaur might have made it into the modern world.
For a plesiosaur to be alive today, it would have to overcome a number of challenges. It's either immortal, or there's a whole family of them living in here undetected. And then, of course, it would have to have found a way into this lake from the ocean. If that all happened, that would be amazing.
The first question to answer is, did plesiosaurs ever live in the seas around Scotland? A clue lies on the windswept island of Skye. The beaches here are a paradise for fossil hunters. Dugald Ross investigates Skye's prehistoric inhabitants. Today, he's hunting for dinosaur footprints, preserved in the rock.
This is a megalosaur footprint. See the toes there? There's the middle one. Carnivore. Smaller than Tyrannosaurus rex.
The footprints are proof that gigantic beasts did roam this part of Scotland.
There's a lot of evidence of dinosaurs milling about here. There's up to 20 footprints here of various sizes of the same species. So it would appear to be a family group that are milling about.
66 million years ago, Skye was teeming with prehistoric life. But did gargantuan reptiles like plesiosaurs also live in these waters? Paleontologist Steve Broussat explores this lost world.
If we go back to about 170 million years ago, Scotland was very different. This was a subtropical world, kind of like Florida or parts of Spain are today.
Investigators first discovered plesiosaur remains on Skye in the 1990s.
In front of me here are a variety of different fossils, and some of these are plesiosaurs. And so some of these, of course, come from the Isle of Skye. This is one here, and this is the tooth of a plesiosaur that would grab and puncture fish.
Plesiosaurs were some of the most successful predators on the planet.
Plesiosaurs lived all over the world. We find their fossils pretty much on every continent. They ranged in size from little ones that were not really much bigger than me, all the way up to monsters that would have terrorized the oceans. A lot of them would have been as ferocious as a T-Rex.
But no matter how hard they look, paleontologists like Steve can't find any plesiosaur fossils later than the event that wiped out the dinosaurs. Long before Loch Ness was formed, a comet, almost the size of Manhattan, hit the Gulf of Mexico. Cascades of volcanic eruptions and fires threw up massive amounts of ash and soot. Blotting out the sun, it turned the Earth into an apocalyptic wasteland. Most plants died on land and sea, and the food chain broke down. For apex predators like plesiosaurs, it was catastrophic. Without fish, they were doomed.
We see the fossils of plesiosaurs and dinosaurs and lots of other creatures disappear basically right at that moment the asteroid hit. As scientists, we never like to say anything is impossible, but I am 99.999999 infinitely % sure that plesiosaurs did not survive that extinction and do not live on in the world today.
The fossil evidence suggests that the conventional plesiosaur definitely became extinct. But those who believe in the Nessie plesiosaur theory insist that a lone family of these creatures could have swum into the loch thousands of years ago. The early history of this lake is still a mystery. Legend has it that this place was once a lush valley. At the bottom was a magical well full of water that could cure all ills. One day, a woman left it uncovered when she heard her child crying. Water rose from the well, flooding the valley and creating Loch Ness. Nessie hunters tell a very different story. After the last ice age, the sea covered much of the Scottish Highlands. As the land rose and the waters receded, a family of plesiosaurs supposedly became trapped in Loch Ness. A river still connects Loch Ness to the sea. So could it be true? Joy Reidenberg wants to take a closer look at the monster's supposed habitat.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Welcome on board.
Thank you. Oh, it's exciting to be here.
She joins biologist Eric Verspoor to find out if a family of plesiosaurs could be trapped here.
It seems like a small sea. How big is this body of water?
It's massive. You could consider it a sea. It's got as much water in it as all the other lakes in the whole of the UK.
Today, a narrow canal and the river link the loch to the Moray Firth estuary. But there are clues that sea creatures once swam here.
Actually, in this bay that we're in right now, Urquhart Bay, one of the previous science expeditions had put an anchor down and they couldn't get it up initially, and it took a long time. And it turned out to be very stuck in the sediments. And when they brought it up, it had a big chunk of muck. And in that, they found the shells of 2 marine clams.
Carbon dating revealed that the clamshells were more than 12,500 years old.
So that was the time when this area became ice-free. And so it would have been marine. And they also found other evidence of other organisms in the sediments that were definitely of marine origin.
It's a tantalizing discovery. Loch Ness was once part of the sea. There's plenty of room in here for a big reptile to hide. But is there enough food for one?
Whenever I see really dark water, I think of the water near where I live, Long Island Sound, off of New York.
Yes.
And it's so filled with life.
All living creatures in the loch depend on sunlight. Eric is going to test the water with a reflector to find out how much penetrates the depths.
And you can see, yeah, it's pretty orange.
After just a few meters, the disc disappears from sight.
So there we are, 4 meters gone.
Fish eat plant-like organisms called algae, which need light to grow. But the loch is full of peat, which makes it murky.
The dark nature of the water is actually associated with the runoff from the stream. So there's a lot of peat in Scotland. The dark color comes from the organic matter that comes off the peat, and to a point where you can only look a foot or 2 into the water.
So if you're really at the bottom of that, it's going to feel like nighttime.
Yeah, absolutely. The bottom of Loch Ness is a dark world.
Fewer algae mean fewer fish.
It's one of the least productive lochs in Scotland. Just a wild guess, but you might expect that you would have in the order of 20 to 40,000 fish. Most of them are very small fish.
So this lake really couldn't support an even bigger predator of, let's say, the size of a plesiosaur?
Bottom line is there wouldn't be a sustainable population of any larger creature in here. There's more food in the rivers themselves, and there's far more food in the Murray Firth.
Ah, so that's where we should be looking for Nessie.
Yes, absolutely.
The loch doesn't have enough fish to sustain a single trapped plesiosaur. Joy suspects that the living fossil theory has more to do with people than monsters.
What was happening here that made us think it was a plesiosaur? Perhaps it was because the turn of the 19th into the 20th century saw the discovery of lots of big dinosaurs. That captured everyone's imagination, and perhaps they wanted their own dinosaur right here.
In the 1930s, films like King Kong imagined gigantic lost beasts. New, more affordable cameras also meant that for the first time, anyone could take a photo of a monster.
It's cool to see how our real beasts, the dinosaurs, are now joining into the ranks of our mythical beasts.
All the evidence suggests that Nessie is not a plesiosaur. But did another, smaller animal inspire the myth?
The Loch Ness Monster is likely based on real creatures. We often find a hint of truth in our monster stories, and then our imagination and creativity go to work, and we get these amazing beasts.
Comparative anatomist Joy Reidenberg casts her net wider to look at the suspects. Most Scottish riverfish are too small to be mistaken for a beast. But one can grow to monstrous proportions.
So we're looking at a fish, a really, really big fish. This is called a sturgeon, and it's a very primitive fish. This one's about 6 feet long, but this is actually small for a sturgeon. The longest recorded sturgeon is over 15 feet long.
In 1932, one woman told of a long, crocodile-like creature. 60 years later, another eyewitness saw a similar beast with a scaly, patterned back. Was this, in fact, a giant sturgeon? The scales of these fish are made of the same hard material as a croc.
These are modified scales called scutes, and they're basically armor. And so you can see the head is all armored like this, and then there are these little bony plates all along the back, and they're also all along the side here, and these are solid. Hear that?
Sturgeons can be dangerous. They have been known to leap out of the water and injure humans.
They don't have any teeth that they can hurt you with. But these armor plates are very rough and very pointy. If one were to knock into you, it'd be kind of like being hit by a club.
If an oversized sturgeon swam into the loch, it could easily be mistaken for a reptilian beast.
This fish has a gas bladder, which is a buoyancy device. And occasionally it may need to go back up to the surface to get more air into that gas bladder. So if you saw this, you might assume that this was some kind of plesiosaur-like or dinosaur-like animal swimming in the lake. It is conceivable that a river fish like this could end up in Loch Ness.
The prehistoric sturgeon fit some accounts. It could even be the large beast in the story of St. Columba. But could more than one animal explain why there are so many different reports and images? Some photos show what looks like a huge, multi-humped serpent. One man even claimed he saw an animal wriggling through the water in the 1800s. Some of these images have never been completely explained. Could Nessie's humps be the coils of a giant snake?
When we think of a water serpent, we usually think of snakes, such as this one here. This is a king snake, except that we don't know of any snakes that are swimming in Loch Ness. So what it's more likely to be is something that is a fish, an eel-like body shape, such as this. This is a lamprey, and lampreys do live in the lake or in the rivers next to the lake.
Lampreys and eels love slow-flowing dark water.
There's something about the appearance of a lamprey that evokes an image of a snake. It's shiny, it's smooth, it's dark, it slips through your fingers when you try to hold on to it. That is not an appealing, cuddly animal. It's something that most people would be afraid to hold.
A lamprey is far too small to be a mythical serpent monster. But one species of Scottish eel can grow up to 1.5 meters long. What's more, the humble serpent has inspired many terrifying lake monsters throughout history. In Greek myth, the Hydra was a poisonous snake with many heads.
The Loch Ness Monster isn't kind of on its own. Water monsters are actually quite popular mythical beasts. The Hydra lived in the lake in ancient Greece.
The snake appears in human mythology as a beast, as an animal, either in the form of a serpent, Garden of Eden, or as a serpent-stroke dragon with a serpent-type face, like a hydra, with many heads. It doesn't matter whether the snake lives on land or in sea. It's something dangerous. It's something otherworldly.
Tales of water serpents may have helped inspire the incredible stories at Loch Ness. But they can't explain the photos of giant humps taken in the 20th century. The sturgeon has Nessie's scaly hide. The eel, its snake-like body. But both these river fish swim very differently.
The problem is the descriptions of the Loch Ness Monster describe humps in the water going up and down. Lampreys and snakes do not swim in an up and down motion. They only swim side to side. So maybe there's something else that can explain what's been seen in the loch.
Joy needs to take her hunt for the monster beyond the banks of the loch. Loch Ness is less than 16 kilometers from the sea. Could a lost sea creature explain the stories of a monstrous serpent? People living in northern Europe had a habit of transforming unknown ocean creatures into mythical beasts. They mistook the fins of killer whales for the tip of the deadly Xiphias, a beast that could sink big ships. They recast the snake-like oarfish as a monstrous killer sea serpent and turned the tusk of the narwhal porpoise into the priceless horn of a unicorn. The sea was a mysterious frontier for our ancestors. Joy investigates one legend.
This is a replica of the tusk of a narwhal. A narwhal is a small whale, a little bit bigger than a dolphin, and it lives in polar waters. These narwhal tusks were gathered by traders, and they brought them across the ocean into Europe. And these had a big resale value because this was hard evidence that unicorns existed.
Unicorns could supposedly purify water just by dipping their horns into it. Joy suspects that the discovery of narwhal tusks reinforced this legend.
So if a unicorn went to try and convert the ocean, it couldn't possibly overpower the ocean. So the magic would go out of the horn and it would fall off at the edge of the ocean. So naturally, where would you find unicorn horns? At the sea. But what I find really interesting is that there is a grain of truth in the legend of the unicorn horn. Narwhals use this tusk to actually navigate among the ice channels because they can tell whether the water is very salty and it's leading them to the ocean.
The case of the narwhal horn proves how creatures of the sea have influenced myths far inland.
A sea monster blended many different qualities of many different creatures you'll see in the sea.
We really don't know the complete biological diversity of the sea. There's a creature called an oarfish, which is extremely weird looking. Every once in a while, one will show up on a beach somewhere, and it just freaks people out because they think this is a monster. It's a monster. Look, who's ever seen this before?
It's highly unlikely that a giant oarfish could be slipping in and out of this loch undetected. The water is not salty enough for these weird ocean-dwelling fish. But Joy wants to find out if another lost animal could somehow look like a legendary sea serpent.
So many people have seen one hump or two humps coming out of the water. But as far as we know, there isn't anything that swims that way in a lake. But we're not far from the ocean. And I'm wondering if some of the things we may see out here might have inspired folks around the loch to think that there was a living animal that was making those humps.
Joy heads out towards the North Sea. She suspects that a sea mammal could be creating the illusion of a serpentine beast.
The seagulls are picking fish out of a group that's in there. And that's where I saw a fin.
Joy thinks she's seen a dolphin feeding alongside a flock of seagulls. But whatever it is disappears. So she heads into deeper water.
Are they feeding on the same fish as dolphins?
Deep fish, yeah.
So that would be a good place to check out.
Suddenly, there is movement in the water. This time, it's a herd of seals.
Right, you're dead on. You see the seal, it's like at 12 o'clock.
Joy is intrigued by the way these animals dive.
There's two there and there's two more to the right. Keep popping up and down. There's 5 altogether.
Back on land, Joy examines her photos. The seals look like humps as they dive into the water.
Of all the marine mammals that arc through the water that might look like a serpent, seals are probably the best bet because they don't have any projections sticking out of their back.
Seals are known to sneak into the River Ness. They feed on salmon.
They probably wouldn't stay very long because once they got into the loch, now there's a lot of room for those salmon to spread out. They wouldn't be so concentrated. And there are not a lot of fish up there anyway. So after they take a look around, they'd probably realize the river's a better place, which means that the sightings of seals would probably be few and far between.
So did a lost herd of seals inspire reports of a lake serpent. Joy thinks that a group of them could mimic the appearance of a single creature with humps.
Usually I only caught one at a time on the camera here, but in the distance I could see a few more of them arcing at the same time. So if you imagine seeing that from far away, it might look like it was one long snake-like animal making each one of those arcs. And so you'd end up with a series of humps all in a row. Not too different from some of the reported sightings of our Loch Ness Monster.
Centuries ago, the people of Loch Ness would have known little about sea mammals. Their information came from the Bible or stories of saints driving out monsters.
So the idea of Nessie, the reptile that lurks in the dark, is connected to a notion about the serpent, even the devil. And it goes all the way back to Babylonian stories. So there's this idea that the blackness and the evil are connected together.
If you see seals in the ocean, you wouldn't think anything weird is happening there. But if you see something that's out of context, seals in a lake, it might start playing tricks on your mind, particularly if you start combining it with local stories.
Seals might explain some of the sightings, but they can't explain photos like this one that appear to show huge humps. If they are genuine, could it be that the waters of the loch are also creating the illusion of a creature?
It's possible that our perceptions of there being a beast is entirely a trick of the light. Our imagination expanded through a desire to see something fabulous, when in fact it's a natural phenomenon.
Some skeptics believe that weird wave formations could also lead people to see a monster that isn't there. Scientist Gareth Williams wants to find out if waves could look like the humps of a serpent.
We've had thousands of eyewitnesses, and I think the nature of the mystery really is the range of possibility of things that they could have seen. I believe most people reported in all honesty, and we have to take those reports seriously.
He investigates at this huge artificial wave tank at Plymouth University in southern England.
This is our ocean basin, so we've got 4 hydraulic jacks that lift our floor up and down.
So the whole floor
comes up and down.
This wave machine will try to replicate the wave of a boat. Loch Ness may look empty, but it's a busy highway.
The wave theory might sound a bit outrageous, particularly for believers in the monster. So what I'm hoping to do here today is see a series of experiments, and that will give me the chance to see whether a wave could possibly, in some cases, be the Loch Ness monster.
In the control room, engineer Martin Hahn fires up the machine. Paddles set off a series of gentle ripples. Suddenly, a bigger wave appears in the middle of them.
That's the wave appearing now, just coming up from nowhere.
This is what's known as a focused wave. It may not look big and impressive, but it can appear completely by surprise. On the Loch, this could happen when the wind whips up fast waves and they catch up with the bow wave of a ship. The waves combine and form large crests that could be mistaken for monster humps, rising out of the water and disappearing again.
So we should have the wave, there it is. So if you're looking at that from the shore, and it was some distance out in the middle of the loch, it would look like something very solid.
The waves will be impossible to predict on the Loch. Could they explain ghostly humps that rise from the water and then vanish?
If you're walking along the side of the loch, walking your dog, chatting to somebody, something catches your eye, you turn around and you see something like a lump of water behaving peculiarly, you could well be fooled into thinking that it was something animate.
Another theory suggests that the lake's unusual geography could also create strange waves. Loch Ness is 36 kilometers long, but very narrow, and the banks are steep and rocky. So when waves from boats hit the sides, they can be reflected back inwards. As they collide, they could appear to stand still and look like a procession of solid humps.
Even in here, looking across those lumps of water, there were times when they appeared quite solid. So out in a place with a bit of magic and a bit of mystery, I think the water could be made to tell you almost anything.
Optical illusions could be responsible for many sightings. The mystery deepens. If there is nothing out of the ordinary here, why is the myth of the monster so unshakable? How did this iconic legend begin?
In Celtic mythology, there's a long tradition of supernatural creatures living in lakes. So it's not just, Loch Ness.
Why would human beings create monsters, dragons, beasts of the waters, leviathans in the lurking depths?
The final piece in the puzzle lies hundreds of kilometers away, with another legendary beast. Beneath the snow-capped mountains of eastern Iceland sits Lake Lagerflöt. According to local legend, it's home to a ferocious water serpent. The tale tells of a young girl who receives a gold ring from her mother. She puts it in a box with a tiny serpent that can magically multiply gold. The serpent grows quickly. It gets so large that the girl throws it into the lake. But even the icy waters can't stop it. It grows into a monster that terrorizes the locals. Eventually, it stretches for kilometers, with humps so big a boat can pass under them. Icelander Stefan Svensson investigates Lagerflöt's mysterious resident. Reports of a lake serpent here go back nearly 700 years. Early maps even warned travelers about it.
You can see here that the lake Lagerfljót is actually represented quite well. An inscription in Latin states that in this lake there is a huge monster, dangerous to people, and is often seen ahead of catastrophic events. So this is very much in line with the legends of the time, that the monster in the lake would show itself ahead of volcanic eruptions or deaths of people of note.
The monster is terrifying. But like Nessie, there's no hard proof that it exists. So why are so many people convinced it's real?
That's it. Okay. Close line.
Stefan heads out onto the lake. He thinks the Icelandic legend may have started as a practical warning about these waters.
The monster itself can represent how you have to respect nature. It is a dangerous body of water, and it has claimed a few hundred lives throughout the century.
The murkiness of these waters also makes it impossible to know for sure what's in them.
There is almost no visibility in the water, and if you would drop something in the water, it would disappear almost instantly. Visibility is a few centimeters at best. You can't really tell what's underneath. You kind of just have the feeling of vastness.
Where you live in your environment very much shapes the stories and the myths that you tell.
I think for things like the sea, where you can't see to the bottom of it, or a dense forest where you can't see all the way in, it's very natural to want to speculate about what's in there, about what could be in there.
A fear of wild places is at the heart of this myth.
I think most Icelanders like to leave a little doubt with everything. We don't necessarily believe in all of our folk stories, or in the monsters or in the elves, but when you look upon a huge body of water like the lake, who are you to say that there's not a monster in there?
Joy Reidenberg thinks these same primal fears could also explain the rise of the Loch Ness myth and its continuing popularity.
There's something very mysterious about deep, dark waters that we can't see into. They really are the uncharted frontier. Big, scary aquatic beasts are really not new in mythology, but I think each group of people repackages it for their time, depending on what was popular.
Public imagination still has a huge appetite for monsters. I mean, if you look at movies like Jurassic Park or even King Kong, they're all about these huge creatures from the past that are still living in our world today.
The Loch Ness Monster exists in a twilight world between fact and fiction.
Myth-making is not unique to the ancient world. It is still happening all the time.
The Loch Ness Monster is a modern fairy tale, a modern story that people want to be told.
I think it's in every human the desire to explore and to hold on to that hope that maybe you're the one that could make the next big discovery.
This famous mythical beast is the creation of our deepest, darkest fears and our desire to live in a world full of monsters.
Perhaps the answer is that people just love a good story. They love a mystery. Something that can scare them just a little bit.